Bryce McKenzie here at the Extension Office. Today, we're going to catch some kids up and put these videos up for folks to come back and look at. We did some intro to livestock judging to teach kids kind of what we're looking for and kind of the basics. And these videos will serve to cover those same discussions that we had and kind of get some folks up to date on what we're doing and what we're looking for as we start judging this summer. And if anybody wants to come, they can revert back to these and kind of see what to look at. Today we're going to do sheep and goats, and so we're going to start with evaluating sheep. So first things first, we have to kind of look at some priorities that we might use to sort and rank sheep as we're starting to talk about them. Those priorities are right here. So on the market lamb side of things, on the left-hand side, number one is structure. We're going to start them at the ground up. You might have heard a few folks say that. We're going to look at their feet and legs and what those need to look like. We'll talk about their rib cage and their shoulder blade. And then we'll talk about their head and neck carriage. A lot of judges will talk about athleticism or how one looks on the move. The next thing will be muscle, and we'll kind of discuss where we look for that. One side note, the next priority for us is actually going to be something that we call condition. And that condition is kind of their fat ratio, so their composition of fat to muscle. So condition in sheep is another way to say they're fat. As we start getting into the live animal portion of this, we'll really dive in on that and what to feel, where to feel, and how to evaluate fat. So we're not going to talk about it near as heavy today. Last thing is balance and eye appeal. Do they look like a show sheep, right? Do all their parts look like they match up? Excuse me. Next section is breeding sheep. You'll see that on the right-hand side here. Same thing as market lambs. That structure is number one. And we'll evaluate that the same way in those breeding sheep as we are in those market lambs. The next thing, instead of going right into muscle, is maternal versus masculine. So when we think of maternal, we want to think of feminine, bold-bodied. Some people would say broody. We think about masculine, and we think about that side of things. That you could say manliness or their muscle mass and shape, and kind of the differences of what those look like. The next thing then, of course, will be muscle. When you're looking at breeding stock, you got to consider the breed. A Columbia ram is not going to be near as stout as a clubby bred ram, or a Hamp or a Suffolk. I mean, just because their goals are different as a breed. Then, of course, last thing on breeding sheep there is balance and eye appeal. And so we will move forward here and start talking about feet and legs. So sometimes I talk about a backward set to the knee, like a half moon shape or a backward C almost in this case. We find the point of the sheep's shoulder, find its knee right here, and we find its hoof. And we draw a line to all of these circles. Notice that it's almost a half moon shape, right? It's like it's a half moon, an arch, a backward C, the start of one. That's pretty ideal for us. This sheep has enough comfort and flex here, but still is upright enough in its pastern. That sheep is comfortable and flexible enough in its knee. And then everything it correlates to the angle of this one's shoulder. Okay, and we'll talk about that here in a few. Now, calf knee, that's where the knee is actually back. And as this one starts to get older and put on more weight or has longevity as a breeding stock, that knee is going to want to follow that arrow and just break down more and more. And there'll come a point in time where that animal either gets too crippled to move or that animal just isn't able to put on any weight anymore. Eventually, that calf knee can also lead to the next problem, which is down here. Weak pasterns. Notice that this pastern is so far down that those dew claws are wanting to move towards the ground. So we want to think of their pasterns as an ankle or almost a wrist for us, which is it's a shock absorber, but it's also their point of impact that they push off of, right? So if I'm thinking of a sheep's leg right here, I got to be able to push off this. But if it gets too far, am I really going to be able to give a lot of leverage and push? Probably not. It's more powerful here, but it's still bent. If it was straight, I still don't have power. There's a fine line of where that leverage needs to be. And this correct version here is upright and still has some flex, but it doesn't have entirely too much. I'll grab the eraser and kind of get rid of that mess there. So this pastern, you can kind of see, does sit back, but it's still straight up. Whereas the weak pastern version, it sits straight back. And there's nothing up right there to help hold it. Then a buck knee, we see this in sheep, probably more common than calf knee. They're over in the knee, and their knee is going to want to move this way as they get older and spend more time on feed. Okay, again, we make them square, we make them soft and strong because we don't want them to break down. So let's move down here to the side view of the rear legs. You got almost the same setup as you do above. If we find the stifle muscle, we find its hock right here, and we find its foot, check out this line. Half moon shape, backward set. It has enough angle right here. This angle is obtuse, it's not acute, right? Like here we are in sickle hock. Notice that this angle almost wants to be 90 or less. Some folks will say this sickle hock sheep is camped under. They can say tucked up. But again, their hock's going to get too sharp and it just comes with too much set. They're going to look wonky as they move too. They're going to have a little extra movement back there that they don't need. Now on post-legged, they're not going to have movement they're going to need. This hock isn't going to flex. See this straight line that follows it down? And you can just see that line just moves from that pin bone right here, straight through the hock, straight through the ankle. That sheep is going to be too upright and too rigid. Okay, it needs to have some flex right in this area so that it can actually move with some elegance and grace. Okay, so we're going to want them to look like this one, and we're going to want them to look like that. So squareness is essential. Base width. We'll talk about what base width really affects here in a minute, and a great tool that base width has. But we want them to be square, and that kind of goes back to joint quality too. The squarer they are, the less problems they have with joints, specifically in the hock joint. But if we look here and we find their pin bone on the correct sheep, and we go over the hock, and we go over the ankle and hoof, those three circles are going to be pretty well in a line. And it's going to be nice and square all the way through. So that one's true and square to his skeleton. This bow-legged sheep, I'm going to draw a couple arrows here and point the direction those hocks are going. Notice that its feet are wanting to point in. Again, that's just going to think about this angle is going to be more and more accentuated the heavier that sheep gets and the longer that they live. And the same problem here with cow hock. The only problem or difference, I should say, than bow-legged is their feet point the opposite directions and those hocks really pinch in. And again, the way those arrows are pointing, the older they get, the more longevity they have. That's exactly what's going to keep happening to those points of contact as far as joints go, is those hocks are going to continue to get worse and worse. So the front view, again, squareness is huge, and we're looking specifically at feet right now. And then at the very far right here, we're looking at knees. So knock-kneed sheep, those knees get entirely too close together. They want to break down and move inward and move inward. And the more feed we push and the more feed we push, the worse that's going to get. Pigeon-toed, these toes want to come across each other. Splay-footed, they point out the opposite way. We see more splay-footed probably sheep than we do pigeon-toed sheep. A lot of times we face issue with when feet just themselves aren't taken care of. But correctness is where both feet are pointing forward. The point of that shoulder, the knee, and that hoof are all right above each other. Just kind of like in the backside there, when we're looking at them from behind, squareness is essential. So shoulder blade, head and neck carriage. This is kind of the next build piece we'll talk about. And we talk about angles. So we find the point of this one's shoulder, and it's probably right around here. The top side of that shoulder is here. And if we just start drawing this like it's a angle, you want this to be a nice 45-degree angle, okay? And so that's essentially what we're looking for here. Sheep on the left-hand side with the number 3 in the bottom quadrant. Here's the point of its shoulder, top side of its shoulder. This head and neck carriage, because of its shoulder being too straight, wants to come down lower. The sheep here on the right, we'll point an arrow at him just so you know which one we're talking about. Sheep here on the right, his head and neck ties more at the top side of its shoulder because it is better at the shoulder angle. This sheep wants to get what we call U-necked. It's where it actually looks like a U, not so much a U as in a female, right? And so that shoulder blade really correlates to what they are underneath on their feet and legs. And it also correlates majorly in how their head and neck carriage is, okay? We want sheep to be running uphill like the one on the right here, with the head and neck coming out of the top side of this skeleton rather than kind of in the middle like the one on the left. Okay, so that's head and neck carriage, and it's all affected by what's underneath. And again, that shoulder, it can affect what's underneath here. The cool thing about livestock in general is that every piece of them goes together and one thing affects the other. So that's one thing to keep in mind is their build, every piece affects another piece. So now we're going to talk about their rib cage. We said cage in their design earlier of the rib cage. We like sheep to be round bodied and get progressively wider as they come back. So we think of their forerib like this and then progressively wider as it comes back. If we look at this lamb here on the left, the 0 marked back sheep, if we look at this guy, you can see this almost looks like he has a ditch runs down his back, right? And that's because of this longissimus dorsi muscle that runs on either side that eventually makes up the loin of this sheep right through here. That thing has plenty of muscle up there. But if we start getting past that and we start thinking about his actual rib cage design, then we can start thinking about like how round bodied is this sheep really, past that muscle, what is the skeleton really like? And you can kind of see here, he carries that muscle out and it's square, but then you can see he's still got roundness underneath. We get back here where this muscle kind of stops and he's still got roundness, right? And so that sheep, we really like the body cage of that sheep, the rib cage and the body style of that sheep is just super round, really opened up. So let's look at this set on the right. And there are 2 sheep in here that are way better bodied, and there are 2 sheep in here that are pretty rough bodied. 1 and 2 are pretty good bodied, right? Foreribs are big, they're bulging, they're round. Both of these are round type right here in that rib cage. Notice that in this section on number 3 here, number 3 really gets tight here. That forerib gets too tight on that sheep. The same with 2, right? You can see that forerib just doesn't have the same roundness and same expression as 1 and 2. 3 and 4, they just want to get a little flatter, right? They don't want to have that same kind of roundness. Now 3, I would say from the rear rib back, it looks pretty good, right? I mean, he's got some shape there, but if we start just evaluating this box on this thing and we just start looking at that forerib, that one's not near as good as 1 and 2. And so those are some differences that we're looking at there as far as rib cage. So muscle and skeletal clues, right? Everyone's going to talk about the muscle. They're going to say, man, we got to look right here at the leg and the stifle. We got to look at the loin and over their back here. Got to look at their rib, right? And that's kind of the first few places that kids look. There are 2 other places that I really, really like kids to focus on. There's one place we don't fib muscle in sheep, in goats and pigs, really any kind of livestock, and this is their forearm. That's their true muscle indicator, those big, bold forearms, and this sheep is big forearmed. I mean, he's got some bulge. You can see some roundness. It doesn't look flat and plain. That's usually a good indicator that the rest of them are going to have muscle. But the big thing here, I want to circle this, is skeletal clues. Look at the base width of this sheep. The wider that those sheep are and square at the ground, the more mass and power they have up high. In pigs, you can see this quite easily. Those really fat pigs can be big up top and narrow based. If they're opened up, essentially, that tells you there's more muscle above it. When we think about a bodybuilder, do they walk around and they're all little? Or do they walk around and they're really opened up and powerful, right? They're big and powerful, and that's because their skeleton is that way to hold that muscle and that mass. Same thing in livestock, okay? So those are some places we're going to look for muscle, and then those are some skeletal clues if that muscle is true or not. Next, we'll talk about maternal and masculine. We'll kind of flip gears and go breeding side. This one here on the left, that's the masculine dude. We can tell, yes, because of his male genitalia and his parts, but also some things that we can talk about on this sheep is his muscle shape and his muscle size, right? So if we look at the leg of the sheep, it's a big bulging leg. We see this big thing of muscle here, the thickness of his neck, the squareness of that one's head, right? And we talk about this big bulging forearm. This sheep's really set up to be big, stout, powerful, kind of masculine, burly thing. And so that's that masculine piece we're talking about. He's super wide at the ground, good in the square, really masculine. Now, if we look at the feminine side, I'm drawing an arrow for us to talk about that feminine side now. This gal over here, she is longer and smoother muscled, right? And that's a feminine trait. She's big and round bodied, but notice what she does exceptionally well is from this rear rib back here to her hook bone, how much deeper she is in this box than she is in this box, right? So ewes specifically carry their lambs right in this area, okay? Because in this rib cage area is where their lungs, their heart, and everything is going to be. Back here is where we're going to carry the babies, right? So we need this to be a big, deep canal and be really kind of a broody shape. And that's what we talk about as broodies. We want a big, round bodied and deeper as they get to their flank, because that's where the production is made, is in that flank zone. Another thing to note here is she's longer, flatter headed. She's not as square. She's prettier headed, right? And she's probably flatter necked. She's not thinner by any means, but she's flatter necked and prettier about her front third. And so that's another feminine versus masculine thing. Okay. So balance and eye appeal, we're kind of talking about trendiness and next level. Okay. And we think next level, we want them to be shallow up front, deeper as they go. Okay. And almost a wedge shape. A good example would be to take a red Solo cup and put it on its side. There will be the side that you drink out of, and then the bottom. And the bottom will be smaller than the drinking side. If you put their head on the smaller side with their butt on the drinking side, that's pretty good. If we had them flipped, that's the opposite of what we're looking for. Again, that is, it's that way because the loin and the leg, so these two parts right here, this portion here and this portion here, those are our most expensive cuts of meat. We want those to be bigger and better as they go back, right? The more wedge they are, the more of those they usually have. And again, on the breeding side of things, right, they carry right here in this flank. So the deeper that flank is, the better off we usually are, just from a production standpoint. So that's what we're kind of talking about as trendy. The next thing on trendy, of course, is right down here on this boot wool. Both of these sheep are great in terms of their shag. And that's, again, we don't eat it, but it's just one of those things. It's a bell and whistle. It's kind of that next level good. But when we talk about balance, we want their front third to look like it matches their middle third, and those front two to look like they match their butt. Okay. And so essentially what I like to do is draw 3 circles. Okay. So there's forerib and the shoulder. We'll do their mid portion here and cut off there at the flank. Then we'll look at their rear third, catch all that butt in there, right? All 3 of these circles are relatively the same size, right? And it would be the same on this ewe lamb if we circled her the same. I'll go ahead and erase those so we can kind of do that same activity here. We just want all 3 of their thirds to look like they match up and line up. And that's the balance portion that we're talking about this whole thing. Okay. Relatively the same as far as those 3 circles go. Both of these sheep are pretty trendy. Both of them have great balance and that eye appeal. Okay. So with sheep, like I said, we're going to talk a lot about their condition when we start to actually get hands on and feel those things. So we're going to move into the goat side of things. I want you to notice that over here on breeding goats, on the left now is breeding. Very, very similar to how we look at sheep, actually in the same orders. And again, consider breeding age. There's Alpine, La Mancha, and they're both dairies, and they're very different than Boer goats, and who are known for their meat production. And so we got to really consider that breeding age. Market goats, same thing. Structure, muscle, condition, which we'll talk about there, balance and eye appeal. And then in goats, we need to talk about their stage of condition and their trendiness too, just how far along they are. And it'll be the same thing that we're looking at in sheep too. I just happened to add this later on, knowing I forgot condition in the first half of this. Then again, trendiness. So we'll move a little faster through here, and we'll just kind of break these structures down, knowing what we learned earlier. Shoulder angle, that one looks pretty good. Top of the shoulder, knee, foot. Notice the backward set to that, right? Hock, foot, stifle. Again, backward set to that. This thing's pretty darn good. Hipped for being goats are foragers, and we're never going to make them perfect right behind the shoulder or on their hip. Now this goat on the right-hand side of things, top of the shoulder, point of the shoulder, substantially straighter. This goat's substantially more over in the knee, and this goat is substantially straighter off its root too, right? We go to the stifle, and we find those circles and we start making those lines. That goat's substantially straighter off both ends. That goat's substantially straighter shouldered. Goat over here on the left, by far, is the better structured of the two. So breeding does, feminine and maternal qualities. We're going to talk about the same thing we did in sheep. Nice flat neck, pretty headed, right? Again, checking those boxes, good angles, right? The angles and way their legs are set are need to be right. But we look at this roundness of body, and then check out this portion where that thing gets deeper to the flank, because just like sheep, those goats are going to carry their babies right in here. Okay, so this one on the left checks a lot of boxes as far as feminine and maternal qualities. Goat over here on the right, sure, flat necked, right? She's still got a pretty neck. Her head's not like the worst thing we've ever seen, but again, this shoulder wants to get too straight. These legs don't necessarily have the backward set through that knee. Hock looks actually fairly okay in this one. Notice that she tucks up here in the flank and just doesn't have the same amount of capacity here, nor the same amount of rib shape that this one over here does. Okay, and so what we're trying to do is just really highlight those differences and really say that's where the maternal piece is. Now on the breeding goat side of things, you really won't see a lot of billies or bucks. You just won't see them at a lot of contests. And it's something that we don't really, because we don't see them, we don't really cover it much. So we just are going to breeze through this. And again, we're going to check those things, those shoulder angles, backward set to the knee, the hock, right? We're going to look for those things, roundness of body. Okay. Notice this one's a little flatter, pretty straight here, pretty straight here. Not a lot of great build here on this kind of roan thing here on the left. Good build one here on the right. The difference here that I want to talk about specifically to feature the masculine portion is this head. Notice how powerful and manly the head is on the goat on the right. Almost like a Roman nose, super square. I mean, that thing just says, hey, I'm a boy. He's big, thick necked, right? I mean, he's showing all those parts of that manliness, kind of masculine. Big thing again, that base width on that guy on the right is huge. That guy probably has true muscle shape. Over here on the left, ooh, maybe not near as much, right? And again, we're showing you kind of extremes of a really good one versus one that's maybe not as, ready to go as far as breeding the next show weather. But we're just really trying to highlight those differences so you can see them. Muscle. Are these two goats heavy muscled? Probably not, right? Not much in terms of the lower leg of this one. Not much for stifle. Has some roundness of rib, but not a whole bunch of just super round bodied. Okay. And again, check out this forearm. Just not super bulging and powerful. Not super wide based. Same here with this one on the right. That base width is disappointing. Forearm's disappointing. And consequently, all of the muscle above those areas is disappointing as well. Fairly flat, pretty flat ribbed. Again, kind of peaked in that spine. Doesn't have that longissimus dorsi sitting on either side of that spine that's super powerful. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, here's a couple goats that are big muscled, right? I mean, they have the big turn of leg. They have some expression, some shape, right? You can see this right through here, roundness of rib. You can see the top coming off this goat. I mean, just big loin thing. And again, big, powerful, bulging forearm, base width. That goat checks quite a few boxes. Same with this one over here on the right. Big hip, super square, big top, round rib, big bulging forearm, square at the ground. Goats and pigs, another great place to look for that as far as muscle keys through the skeleton are in their head. The bigger square heads are usually the more muscular goats, and we'll show you an example of that here in a second. So clip goats and muscle, how do we, there's a lot of goats that we'll see that are clipped. How do we know true muscle, right? I mean, this could be quite a good clip job here, where they really flatten it out and they really kind of pull hair up. How do we see that true muscle? Well, again, it's that skeleton clue that we got to go back to the ground and look at them there. Then we got to look at the width between their eyes. Usually the square-headed goats that have more width, because that's their skull, which is part of their skeleton, usually the rest of their skeleton reads that same way, okay? And that's what I'm talking about here. If we look at the goat on the left, if we just look at this thing's eyes, this thing is super wide skulled. This thing is square at the ground, right? Big forearmed. Same with this goat here on the right. If we just look and drew a line, talked about the squareness of skull, and we talked about their base width and their forearm, man alive, those are some really good points that, yeah, that thing's probably got true muscle. So next is balance and eye appeal. Again, we'll talk about condition and stage of condition as we get to seeing live animals. All of these goats are trendy. Of course, on either side of the one in the middle, you have some goats that are fit up, that their legs look pretty sweet, pretty trendy. But the big thing is all of these goats, their head and necks are all at the top side of their skeleton, right? Their shoulder angles are pretty impeccable. But beyond that, they're shallow in their front third and deeper as they go back. That is the major trend of what we would say trendiness, right? And so all three of those do that exceptionally well. Then beyond that, if we start talking about the balance aspect of that, again, we want those three circles to all look like they go together, right? So we take the rear third, middle third, front third, draw those circles and make them all go together. Okay, so that's our basic rundown there of evaluating sheep and goats. We'll put one up there here later on about evaluating hogs and another one on evaluating cattle. And again, these are really quick run throughs just to help get some kids caught back up before we start really seeing stuff live this summer. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.